as if running ourselves into the ground somehow proves our worth, as if our value as human beings is directly proportional to how depleted we feel at the end of each day. I recently had the extraordinary opportunity to interview Shamica Frasier, whose insights have fundamentally transformed how I understand the relationship between rest, resilience, and true achievement. Shamica isn't just another wellness guru throwing empty platitudes at exhausted professionals. She's a revolutionary thinker whose work in empowering women, particularly Black women, to embrace self-compassion has created ripples of transformation across countless lives. Her ability to reframe rest as an act of courage rather than weakness has quite literally saved careers, relationships, and in some cases, lives. Her wisdom forms the foundation of what I'm sharing with you today. The truth is, we've been sold a dangerous myth, the myth that success requires constant motion. That rest is laziness. That kindness toward yourself is somehow self-indulgent. That the path to achievement is paved with burnout and self-criticism. But what if everything we've been taught about success is backward? What if our cultural obsession with productivity is actually making us less productive? What if our fear of rest is precisely what's keeping us from our greatest breakthroughs? This isn't just feel-good philosophy. This is practical wisdom drawn from real experiences of women who've discovered that their greatest achievements came not from pushing harder, but from daring to pause. Consider the hosts of the Black Women Working podcast, Natalie Carter, Chantel Clark, Rachel Brown, and Tolu Lawal. These remarkable women created a platform centered on the real-life experiences of Black women navigating professional environments in the UK. Their listeners face formidable challenges, microaggressions that chip away at confidence, underrepresentation that breeds isolation, pay gaps that devalue their contributions. But what makes their approach revolutionary isn't just naming these obstacles. It's their insistence that women shouldn't internalize these negative experiences. That self-compassion isn't optional. It's essential. One listener shared how a particularly difficult performance review had left her questioning her abilities and worth. For weeks, she berated herself, working longer hours, sleeping less, trying to prove herself. But after listening to an episode about breaking the cycle of internalized criticism, she tried something different. She gave herself permission to feel disappointed without shame. She took a weekend completely off, no emails, no preparation for Monday. And when she returned, she had clarity about which feedback was useful and which was not. I stopped trying to be perfect, she said, and started focusing on being effective instead. This is the paradox Shamica Frasier illuminates so brilliantly. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is nothing at all. Rest isn't weakness, it's strategy. The hosts of Affirmations for Black Girls understand this deeply. Their podcast explores the challenging transition from what they call survival mode to softness, particularly for Black women who've been conditioned to believe they must constantly hustle just to stay in place. Their host, Tyra, shares openly about her own journey from exhaustion to intentional rest. I was so tired, she recalls, not just physically tired, but soul tired. I was trying so hard to make it through each day that I forgot what I was making it through for. This resonates, doesn't it? How many of us have lost sight of our purpose in the relentless pursuit of what exactly? Another promotion, another zero in our bank account, another line on our resume that we're too exhausted to even celebrate. Tyra's vulnerability created space for others to admit their own exhaustion. One guest described how she built her identity around being the woman who could handle everything: multiple projects, family responsibilities, community leadership, until her body simply refused to continue. A panic attack in the middle of a presentation became her wake-up call. "I had to learn," she said, "that resting wasn't giving up. It was giving myself what I needed to continue." This is what Shamica Frasier means when she talks about rest as a radical act. In a world that profits from your exhaustion and self-doubt, choosing rest is an act of rebellion. Choosing self-compassion is revolutionary. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. We've internalized the voice of the critic so deeply that being kind to ourselves can feel wrong, indulgent, unearned. Emma Greed's podcast, Aspire, features entrepreneurs who faced public failures and setbacks. These are people who could easily have spiraled into harsh self-judgment. Instead, they chose radical self-kindness, viewing every setback not as a final verdict on their worth, but as feedback for growth. One guest described losing a major contract that represented 60% of her company's revenue. "I had two choices," she said. "I could beat myself up about what I should have done differently, or I could treat myself with the same compassion I'd show a friend in crisis." She chose compassion. She gave herself 2 weeks to process the disappointment. No forced positivity, no immediate pressure to replace the lost business. Just space to feel what she needed to feel. When she returned to work, she had a clarity that panic would have obscured. She restructured her business to ensure she'd never again be so dependent on a single client. 3 years later, her company was stronger than ever, not despite her pause, but because of it. This is the counterintuitive truth Shamica Frasier's work reveals. Fumbles aren't fatal. They're formative, but only if we meet them with compassion rather than contempt. Think about how you talk to yourself when you make a mistake. Would you ever speak to someone you love the way you speak to yourself? For most of us, the answer is a horrified no. We reserve our harshest judgments, our most cutting criticisms for ourselves. And we call this holding ourselves accountable, as if cruelty were somehow more motivating than kindness. But the evidence tells a different story. Research in psychology consistently shows that self-compassion, not self-criticism, predicts greater resilience, motivation, and yes, achievement. When we're kind to ourselves in difficult moments, we activate our mammalian caregiving system. Our bodies release oxytocin and opiates rather than cortisol. We feel safe enough to acknowledge our mistakes without defensive denial. We can learn and grow rather than shut down in shame. This isn't soft science. This is neurobiology. This is how we're wired. So why is it so hard to practice? For many women, and particularly for Black women, as Shamica Frasier's work illuminates, self-compassion can feel dangerous in a world that already questions your competence, your commitment, your very right to take up space. When you're constantly fighting to prove your worth, pausing can feel like surrender. But here's the revolutionary truth. Your worth isn't earned through exhaustion. Your value doesn't increase with each sacrifice of your well-being. You are inherently worthy of kindness, especially from yourself. This is what the women in these podcasts discovered. This is what Shamica Frasier teaches. This is what I want you to take home today. Imagine what might be possible if you treated yourself with the same compassion you show others. If you viewed your mistakes not as character flaws, but as inevitable steps on the path to mastery. If you gave yourself permission to rest not as a last resort, when you're already broken, but as a regular practice that fuels your purpose. The Women of the Black Women Working podcast created a space where vulnerability is normalized, where hundreds have found their voice through relatable storytelling, where workplace cultures are shifting toward greater inclusivity. The Affirmations for Black Girls community has sparked movements devoted to mutual encouragement around boundary setting and restorative practices. They're reframing rest as resistance against grind culture. Emma Greed's guests have shown that reinvention, not relentless grinding, is the hallmark of true success. That strategic pauses create the conditions for breakthrough. None of this happened by accident, and none of it happened through self-criticism or burnout. It happened through radical self-compassion, through permission to rest, through treating fumbles as fuel rather than failures. So I stand before you today with a challenge to revolutionize your relationship with rest, with failure, with your own humanity. I challenge you to practice one radical act of self-compassion today, to give yourself permission to pause, even for 5 minutes, without guilt, to speak to yourself with the kindness you'd offer a dear friend facing disappointment. I challenge you to question the voice that tells you your worth is measured by your productivity, to recognize that voice not as truth, but as a cultural myth that serves systems of power, not people. I challenge you to see your next mistake not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as proof of your courage, because you're trying something difficult, something that matters. This isn't just about feeling better, though that matters too. This is about reclaiming your power, about refusing to be defined by a culture that measures human value in output rather than essence, about creating space for the breakthroughs that can only come when we allow ourselves to breathe. When we rest, we resist. When we practice self-compassion, we disrupt systems designed to keep us exhausted and self-doubting. When we treat our fumbles as teachers rather than tormentors, we transform not just ourselves, but the world around us. So today, right now, I invite you to join this quiet revolution, to become a radical practitioner of rest, a fierce advocate for your own humanity, a compassionate witness to your own journey, because the world doesn't need more exhausted strivers. It needs whole, rested, compassionate humans who know their worth beyond what they produce. It needs you, not burned out, but burning bright, not perfect, but perfectly human, not relentlessly productive, but profoundly alive. Thank you.